Let us see what is SQL. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It is a standardized programming language used for managing and manipulating relational databases. The main purposes include data querying, retrieve specific data from one or more tables, data manipulation, insert, update, delete, and manage data within the tables. Data definition. Define and modify database schema, including creating, altering, and dropping tables and indexes. Data control. Manage access to data and database objects, including granting and revoking permissions. So basically, SQL performs CRUD operation. C stands for create, R stands for read, U stands for update, and D stands for delete. Now let us see how SQL works. SQL works by enabling interaction within relational database management system through a series of commands and statements. Here's the step-by-step breakdown of how SQL works. One is connecting to the database. Next will be SQL query execution, followed by parsing and optimization, execution, data retrieval and modification, transaction management, result handling, connection termination. These are all the steps that depicts how SQL works. Let's see each of them step by step. First is connection to the database. Users or application connect to a database server using a database client or application interface. A connection string which includes the database name, server address, user credentials, and other parameters that is used to establish this connection. As you can see in this example showing the connection to the database. Next is SQL query execution. First will be the query creation. Users write SQL queries to perform various operations such as retrieving data using the select command, modifying data, insert, update, delete command, and managing the database schema using the create, alter, and drop command. Next will be the submission. The query is sent to the database server through the established connection. As you can see the typical example of SQL query execution. Next will be parsing and optimization. Parsing. The database server parses the SQL query to check its syntax and validity. Optimization. The query is then optimized to determine the most efficient way to execute it. This involves choosing the best execution plan based on the available indexes, the structure of the database, and several other factors. Next will be execution. The optimized query execution plan is executed by the database engine. Depending on the type of query, this may involve reading data from the disk, performing calculation, and writing data back to the disk. Next will be data retrieval and modification. Retrieval. For select queries, data is fetched from the database and returned to the user or application. Modification. For insert, update, and delete queries, the specified changes are made to the database. Next will be the transaction management. SQL supports transactions, which are the sequence of operations performed as a single logical unit. All the transactions ensure ACID properties. ACID stands for atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability, providing reliable and consistent database operations. Commands like begin transaction, commit, and rollback are used to manage these transactions. Next will be the result handling. The result of the query, whether it's the data retrieval, confirmation of data modification, or an error message, is sent back to the client or application. And the last one is the connection termination. So after executing the required queries, the connection to the database server is closed. Now let us see the bit of SQL standards. SQL was established as a standard by ANSI in 1986 as SQL 86 and by ISO in 1987. It is maintained by the ISO subcommittee thereafter. SQL standards are maintained by ANSI and ISO, but various other database systems such as MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQL Server, and Oracle have their own extensions and variations. SQL has evolved significantly since its inception in the 1970s. It has grown from a theoretical language developed at IBM to a widely adopted standard used by numerous RDBMS products. Over the decade, the SQL standard has been periodically updated by ANSI and ISO to incorporate new features, enhanced functionality, and address the changing needs of the database community. Today, if you see, SQL remains a fundamental technology for data management and manipulation in relational database systems around the world. Now, let us see some of the SQL history. In 1970, a computer scientist at IBM named Edgar published a seminal paper titled A Relational Model of Data for Large Shared Data Banks. This paper introduced the concept of the relational database model, which would form the theoretical foundation for SQL. In 1973 to 74, IBM researchers named Donald and Raymond developed a language called SQL, Structured English Query Language, to manipulate and retrieve data stored in IBM's prototype relational database system, System R. Later in 1976, this language was later renamed to SQL, back to Structured Query Language, due to a trademark dispute over the name SQL. If you look to 1980s, in 1986 the American National Standard Institute ANSI adopted SQL as a standard known as SQL 86. This was the first official standardization of the language. In 1987, the International Organization for Standardization ISO adopted SQL as an international standard, ISO 9075. Next, if you see in 1999, another major update to the SQL standard known as SQL 1999 or SQL 3 introduced features like object relational database management and support for procedural programming. In 2003, SQL 2003 standard was released, introducing XML related features to support XML data integration. Now to conclude SQL history in the summary, in June 1970, Dr. Cord published a paper titled A Relational Model of Data for Large Shared Data Banks in the ACM Journal Communications of the ACM. Cord's model is now widely recognized as the definitive framework for relational database management systems. IBM Corporation developed the structured English query language SQL to implement the Cord's model, which was later renamed SQL. In 1979, relational software, which is now known as Oracle, released the first commercially available implementation of SQL. Today, SQL is acknowledged as the standard language for RDBMS. Now let us see some of the basic SQL commands. Select. Select command is used to retrieve data from one or more tables. The syntax is as follows. Select column 1, column 2 from table name. Insert. Insert is used to add new rows to a table. The syntax will look like this. Update. Update command is used to modify the existing data in a table. The syntax will look like this. Delete. Delete command is used to remove the rows from a table. The syntax will look like this. Now let us look at some advanced SQL commands. Join. This command is used to combine rows from two or more tables based on the related columns. Example will be like this. Subqueries. This is nest queries within another query. Syntax will be like this. Indexes. It improves the speed of data retrieval operations. It look like this. Views. It creates a virtual table based on the result of a select query. The syntax will be like this.